Chapter 7 The Lovesick Colonel. The American Revolution unfolded in a leisurely enough manner to allow Hamilton a fairly rich social life amid the grim of necessities of war. With the young man's need for diversion, he continued to flirt with the fashionable ladies who stopped by Army headquarters. Not for nothing did Martha Washington nickname her large, lascivious tomcat Hamilton, and they warmed to his high spirits, savior fare, and dancing ability. The Continental Army had a sizable following of camp ladies, and John Marshall was scandalized by the open debauchery that he encountered when visiting the army that September. Never was I a witness to such a scene of lewdness, he complained to a friend. Hamilton once told a friend that a soldier should have no wife other than the military. Yet he began to contemplate marriage in the spring of 1777. Following the growing alliance with France, which improved the prospects of American victory, he knew that once the war ended he had no family. That April, Hamilton composed a long letter to John Lawrence outlining his requirements for a wife. Probably from childhood experience, he thought that most marriages were unhappy, and he dreaded making the wrong choices. Parts of his letter were sophomoric, with Hamilton making body references to the size of his nose, jocular 18th century shorthand for jocular 18th century shorthand for his penis, but much of it was thoughtful, showing that Hamilton had given such serious consideration to the elements of a stable marriage. She must be young, handsome. I lay most stress upon a good shape, sensible, a little learning will do, well-bred, but she must have an aversion to the word ton, chaste and tender. I am an enthusiast in my notions of fidelity and fondness of some good nature, a great deal of generosity. She must neither love money nor scolding, for I dislike equally a termagant and an economist. In politics I am indifferent what side she may be of. I think I have arguments that will easily convert her to mine. As to religion, a moderate streak will satisfy me. She must believe in God and hate a saint. But as to fortune, the larger stock of that the better. You know my temper and circumstances will therefore pay special attention to this article in the treaty. Though I run no risk of going to purgatory for my avarice, yet, as money is an essential ingredient to happiness in this world, as I have not much of my own, and as I am very little calculated to get more either by my address or industry, it must needs be that my wife, if I get one, bring at least a sufficiency to administer to her own extravagancies. In describing his ideal wife, Hamilton sketches something of a self-portrait as he tries to strike a balance between worldliness and morality. He frankly admits to a desire for money, yet is not a slave to greed. A believer in conventional morality and marital fidelity, he nevertheless hates a prig. He likes religion in moderation. Clearly, he likes fanaticism and sanctimony, and instead of a sex goddess or nubile coquette, types that had always titillated him, he opts for a solid, sensible, reasonably attractive wife. When Washington took his troops to winter quarters at Morristown that December, Hamilton had extra time to dwell on his future plans. Washington and his staff occupied the mansion of the late Judge Jacob Ford, a stately wide house with green trim. Hamilton worked in a log office annexed to the mansion and slept in an upstairs bedroom with Tench Tilghman and James McHenry. The elements conspired against the Continental Army that winter, and said to be one of the most frigid in the century. In New York Bay, the ice froze so thick that the British Army was able to wheel heavy artillery across it. 28 snowstorms pounded the Morristown headquarters, including a January blizzard that lasted 3 days, piling snow in 6-foot-high banks. For Washington, it was the war's nadir, a winter even more depressing than the one at Valley Forge. The snowstorms shut off roads and blocked provisions, leading to looting among troops freezing in log huts. Men mutinied and deserted in large numbers. On January 5, 1780, Washington sent Congress a dreary account. Many of the men have been 4 or 5 days without meat entirely and short of bread, and none but on very scanty supplies. Some, for their preservation, have been compelled to maraud and rob from the inhabitants. and I have it not in my power to punish or repress the practice. These problems were compounded by the structural inability of Congress to tax the states and establish public credit. The memories of Valley Forge and Morristown would powerfully affect the future political agendas of both Washington and Hamilton, who had to grapple with the defects of a weak central government. In January, when Washington didn't allow Hamilton to join Lawrence for a combat command in the South, Hamilton tumbled into the darkness of depression. "I am chagrined and unhappy, but I submit," he wrote to Lawrence. "In short, Lawrence, I am disgusted with everything in this world but yourself and very few more honest fellows, and I have no other wish than as soon as possible to make a brilliant exit. 'Tis a weakness, but I feel I am not fit for this terrestrial country." It was not for the first time that Hamilton had glancingly alluded to suicide or emigration, or suggested he was miscast on the American scene. Salvation, it turned out, was at hand, as the Morristown winter proved unexpectedly sociable. The Marquis de Chastellux remembered one convivial dinner with George Washington, at which the lively Hamilton doled out food, refilled glasses, and proposed gallant toasts. Sleighing parties full of pretty young women succeeded in crossing the snowdrifts to attend receptions. Hamilton subscribed to dancing assemblies, fancy dress balls attended by chief officers, held at a nearby storehouse. Washington, in a black velvet suit, danced and cut a dashing figure with the ladies, while Steuben flashed with medals, and French officers glistened with gold braid and lace. In this anomalous setting, the women courted these revolutionaries in powdered hair and high heels. To the vast amusement of Washington's family, Hamilton was infatuated that January with a young woman named Cornelia Lott. Colonel Samuel B. Webb even wrote a humorous verse mocking how the young conqueror had himself been conquered. Now Hamilton feels the inexorable dart, and yields Cornelia at his heart. The fickle Hamilton soon moved to a young woman named Polly. On February 2nd, 1780, hard on the heels of Cornelia and Polly, Elizabeth Schuyler arrived in Morristown, accompanied by a military escort, to stay with relatives. She carried introductory letters to Washington and Steuben, one of the most gallant men in the camp, from her father, General Philip Schuyler. The general's sister, Gertrude, had married a well-established physician, Dr. John Cochrane, who had moved to New Brunswick, New Jersey, to have a safe, pleasant spot for inoculate people against smallpox. Not only was Cochrane an excellent doctor, he also traveled with the army as Washington's personal physician, and Lafayette had dubbed him Good Dr. Bones. But he was later appointed Director General of the Army's Medical Department. During the winter encampment of Morristown, Cochrane and his wife stayed at the neat white house of their friend, Dr. Jabez Campfield, a quarter-mile down from the road from Washington's headquarters. So Schuyler found herself in close proximity to her future husband. Hamilton's place on Washington's staff enabled him to socialize with Eliza Schuyler on equal terms. He had already met her on his flying visit to Albany in 1777 when he coaxed General Horatio Gates into surrendering troops to Washington. Even without this prior meeting, Hamilton would have met Schuyler because she came with their mutual friend Kitty Livingston, long a favorite object of flirtation with Hamilton. Hamilton, 25, was instantly smitten with Schuyler, 22. Fellow aide Tench Tillman reported, "Hamilton is a gone man." Pretty soon, Hamilton was a constant visitor at the two-story Campfield residence, spending every evening there. Everyone noticed that the young colonel was starry-eyed and distracted. Although a touch absent-minded, Hamilton ordinarily had a faultless memory, but returning from Schuyler one night, he forgot the password and was barred by the sentinel. The soldier lover was embarrassed, recalled Gabriel Ford, then 14, the son of Judge Ford. The sentinel knew him well, but was stern in the performance of his duty. Hamilton pressed his hand to his forehead and tried to summon the important words from their hiding place. But, like the faithful sentinel, they were immovable. Ford took pity on Hamilton and supplied the password. By the time Hamilton left Morristown in early March to negotiate a prisoner exchange with the British in Amboy, New Jersey, scarcely more than a month after the courtship began, he and Schuyler had decided to wed. Hamilton must have been struck by the coincidence that his paternal grandfather, Alexander Hamilton, had also married an Elizabeth, who was the daughter of a rich, illustrious man. For Hamilton, Eliza formed part of a beautiful package labeled the Schuyler family, and he spared no effort over time to ingratiate himself with the three sons, John Bradstreet, Philip Jeremiah, and Rensselaer, and 5 daughters, Angelica, Eliza, Margarita, Cornelia, and the as yet unborn Catherine. The daughters, in particular, all smart, beautiful, gregarious, and rich, must have been the stuff on fantasy for Hamilton. Each played a different musical instrument, and they collectively charmed and delighted all visitors to the Schuyler Mansion in Albany. After spending a week with the family in April 1776, Benjamin Franklin expressed pleasure with the ease and affability in which we were treated, and the lively behavior of the young ladies. Tench Tillman was likewise captivated. There is something in the behavior of the general, his lady, and daughters that makes one acquainted with them instantly. I feel uneasy and free from restraint at his seat. The daughters had enough spunky independence that 4 or 5 eventually eloped, Eliza being the significant exception. Cornelia enacted the most colorful escape, later stealing off with a young man, Washington Morden, by climbing down a rope ladder from her bedroom and fleeing in a waiting coach. With fairy tale suddenness, the orphaned Hamilton had annexed a gigantic and prosperous clan. After seeing pictures of Eliza's younger sister, Margarita, always called Peggy, he sent her a long rambling letter in which he poured out his love for her older sister. I venture to tell you in confidence that by some odd contrivance or other, your sister has found the secret of interesting me in everything that concerns her. She is unmercifully handsome, and so perverse that she has none of those pretty affectations which are the prerogatives of her beauty. Her good sense is destitute of that happy mixture of vanity and ostentation which would make it conspicuous to the whole tribe of fools and foplings. She has good nature, affability, and vivacity embellished with that charming frivolousness which is justly deemed one of the principal accomplishments of a belle. In short, she is so strange a creature that she possesses all the beauties, virtues, and graces of her sex, without any of those amiable defects are esteemed by connoisseurs necessary shades in the character of a fine woman. In this letter, Hamilton endows Schuyler with traits exactly consistent with the list he had prepared for John Laurens 10 months later. She was handsome, sensible, good-natured, and free from vanity or affection. And since she was the daughter of one of New York's wealthiest, most powerful men, Hamilton would not have to choose between love and money. Born on August 9th, 1757, Elizabeth Schuyler, whom Hamilton called either Eliza or Betsy, remains invisible in most biographies of her husband, and was certainly the most self-effacing founding mother, doing everything in her power to focus the spotlight exclusively on her husband. Her absence from the pantheon of early American figures is unfortunate, since she was a young woman of sterling character. Beneath an animated, engaging facade, she was loyal, generous, compassionate, strong-willed, funny, and courageous. Short and pretty, she was utterly devoid of conceit. She was utterly devoid of conceit, and was to prove an ideal companion for Hamilton, lending a strong home foundation to his turbulent life. His letters to her reflected not a single moment of pique, irritation, or disappointment. Everybody sang Eliza's praises, a brunette with the most good-natured, lively dark eyes that I ever saw, which threw a beam of good temper and benevolence over her whole countenance. Tench Till wrote in his journal, "She was no pampered heiress, an athletic woman and a stout walker. She moved with a determined spring in her step. On one picnic excursion, Tillman watched her laughingly clamber up a steep hillside, while less plucky girls required male assistance. The Marquis de Chastellux liked her mild, agreeable countenance, while Brissot de Warville credited her with being a delightful woman who combines both the charms and attractions and the candor and simplicity typical of American womanhood. Like others, James McHenry sensed intense passion throbbing beneath her restraint. She could be impulsive. Hers was a strong character with its depth and warmth, whether of feeling or temper controlled, but glowing underneath, bursting through at times in some emphatic expression.